Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world. My name is Dr. DAAM. This is the Dr. DAAM Podcast, episode 37, titled Law and Morality and Then Reality. This is also the Society Podcast and affectionately called DAAM Podcast because, as you guys can see, for the last 37 episodes, as I've grown the amount of episodes, it's been me as the singular editor. But I want to talk about the law, morality, and the law in reality. So I'll start with a little backstory, actually two backstories. When I was at the United States Military Academy at West Point, I studied law. It's called American Legal Systems back then. And I find the law very fascinating. The intricacies, how cases are decided. It's a beautiful thing. So I aspire to be a lawyer based on that perspective. But then I ran into something called the law school admissions tests, and I was not the best at the law school admissions test for many reasons. I basically spread out my studies across months instead of compressing to 30 days, as I would later on do with the GRE, graduate record exam. And I also was late to one of my exams by accidentally driving into Oktoberfest in 2006. So missed that exam, but I would eventually take it the next year at the same location in Munich, Germany, at Munich University. But I also struggled with the logic structuring. I don't think my brain had been developed enough to understand the various displacement of logic. My belief now is the fact that I would be much more successful in terms of understanding the requirements for the LSAT. And because I understand the general framework of the law, how the law works here in the United States and how the law works internationally and in different other countries, having experienced various jurisdictions and so forth. My second story is the fact that my daughter wants to be a lawyer. So I've decided she's only in 8th grade, halfway through 8th grade, but I bought her the LSAT's book for 2025. So she has a running head start 9-10 years before she has to consider taking a real exam and going forward with it. But I wanted her to have familiarity and a sense of strong foundation in relation to the test that I did not have, and be truly committed to going to law school. That is her intent of a long term. And I will support her to the end of my ability as much as possible for her to achieve her dreams. But my perspective is that she's going to run into, like most of us who have experienced the law, that there's the law, there's morality, and then there's reality. I was sitting in a recent class a couple days ago, and we were discussing the law of war. What constitutes a combatant from an illegal combatant and non-combatant. And there was this young boy dressed in just a shirt and a small pants, and he had a something on his head, and he was pointing a weapon at a picture. And he was about maybe 9-10 years old or something like that, or younger. And the class is at, and he was just in a garb that would align with certain groups and so forth. And we were asked if he was a lawful combatant, and myself, I said no, based on rules of engagement from war. But as the instructor would go on to say, yes, ROEs or rules of engagement would state X, that this person may not be a combatant, but the law of war says that because, or he's a legal combatant, but the law of war would place a target on that person, and it's like there's a law, there's a morality in your mind of like, why would you target a person, a child, and then there's reality, the fact that that child is walking around with a weapon, and your mind is stunned because you have children and you're thinking, there's no way I would do that. But then you also realize that if that child starts shooting at you in a hostile situation, you're going to fire back. It's a natural human reaction to preserve your life, especially under certain conditions. So that really got me thinking about what the law means, how morality factors into law, and what the reality of the law is. And that impacts our society in many cases. We see the recent case of President-elect Trump. He violated a law, and he fought as per the law. He could fight the charges, the conviction, and so forth. And he was able to get certain things that would not be afforded to other defendants based on his stature. And you wonder, is that moral or ethical? And you're stunned because you're told no one is above the law, and then you see this happening, and you realize the reality of what the law is different than what it actually says. And I think a lot of us have this wonderful belief that the law will work out the way it ought to based on what it states, but it doesn't. That's the reality. Human intervention becomes part of the process. Societal facts become part of the process. But tomorrow, one thing that's happened though, tomorrow President-elect Trump will be sentenced in New York courts for a 34-count conviction for violating the law in New York City in terms of financial misdealings and so forth, and electoral interference in a way. But it's just interesting to me, and I'm sure it'll be to my daughter once she decides to become a lawyer, if she pursues that path to its great conclusion, how we can read a law and it has moral and ethical implications, but those moral and ethical implications is devoid of the reality of implementing and executing the law, and how it's going to be realized in the real world. And I think that kind of structuring and that kind of divide creates a lot of disillusionment in people in society, because they want things to be black and white in terms of how the law is structured, but they forget. They like the rest. They like me realize that there is a divide in terms of how the law will follow through because of the human factor. There are those who will circumvent the law. There are those who will find ways to upend the law. There will be those who find ways to maneuver through the law, which and turn it into something that was not what it was created to be. And there are those who just defy the law and get away with it. And your moral and ethical compass, which is, morality and ethics and some are different, but your moral ethical compass would be look at it and say that's wrong, But reality is what we deal in here in the real world, in our society. And I think if we're going to make a strong and great society, we've got to really assess the law in real terms. I've had a discussion the other day with a friend, I think it was last night, about the situation in Gaza, horrendous situation, innocent loss of life and so forth. But there was the situation where folks would talk about what's genocide and what's not genocide and so forth. And I think it was the International Criminal Court came down on the fact that Israel was committing crimes against humanity along with members of Hezbollah and others, which I think was which told me the fact that what the law is and what reality is what the judges will pursue. And I think that crimes against humanity was a valid argument based on what I'd seen and understand international law. But a lot of folks, which is understandable to them, they'd be like, wait, that's not what I thought. Because their ethics, their morality and ethics would say the actions being committed by X, Y, and Z falls in this moral area, and it's hard for people to understand that, and I totally empathize with them, and that's the reality of the law. The law is very complicated. The law is very convoluted. The law is very complex. It's not as straightforward as we want it to be. Another example. Was it December 20th? The most recent government continuing resolution passed, funding the U.S. government until March. And there were many good things inside the original CR that was stripped out because Elon Musk and Donald Trump got involved in the process. And you're thinking, why are they involved in the process? And then you realize the fact that what is the implementation or creation of a law is affected by the reality of multiple stakeholders trying to have their own input rise to prominence, which may be in their interests versus the rest of society. You also realize that money and power have a greater influence, greater impact on people's aspirations in terms of what law will benefit them. Money and power will take the law in a different direction than what maybe in the best needs of the wider society, the wider population. And that's reality. You will question the morality and the ethics of that, and I would too, and I justify questioning. But you realize that in the real world which we live in, there's a very stark division between law and morality, morality and reality, and law and reality. And this is one of the reasons why I created that title. When I first created a title, it was just law and morality, and I thought to myself, that's not reality. I've got to speak how real the law is in terms of its impact on people and how it's executed, how it's created, how it's drafted, the factors that go into it, how it's implemented, and then how it's executed. Because people's lives are affected by how the law is implemented and executed. We all would like to think that our society is built on an even playing field. I would like to think that. I want to think that. I want to believe in that. But the law is sometimes structured where an uneven playing field is created, and the reality is a straight edge society is created because of that uneven playing field, due to the fact that the law was influenced by multiple parties with a vested interest in the law going a different way. And the vested interest was the law going in their direction. Another perfect example is tax breaks. Tax breaks are normally designed to lower people's taxes, get them a better spot in terms of finances, alleviate a burden. But when you analyze the structure of the tax breaks, it normally flows to the higher echelons, more richer, more affluent parts of society. And a lot of folks would question, is that moral? Is that right? Is that ethical? It's the law as written, and it's reality. And many people co-sign that reality in terms of how they vote, in terms of how they decide to position themselves in society. And many are also surprised by the outcomes. And I sometimes, from my vantage point, I'm not surprised by the outcomes because I've studied these things and I've come to understand these things. That's why, I mostly align on the left, even though it would be my financial interest to align on the right. But I have a moral compass that says that I will support our society, wider society, over my interests, And that is not to say I'm like this perfect person. I'm not. I'm far from it. And I would never impugn someone else by saying they're imperfect or they're wrong for their motivations. It's just the fact that we have different perspectives on how society ought to function and how the law should be applied. And we can see that in how our justices are selected by the various presidents, You would think that a president would select a Supreme Court justice based on that person's acumen, that person's accomplishments, and so forth. But no, Supreme Court justices are selected based on their ideology. And that's where law, morality, and reality divide. You would think that we would select folks on the knowledge of the law, how moral they are, how ethical they are. But no, they're selected in terms of how much power they can transfer back to a certain group. And that's reality. Will some of those people surprise you in how they decide stuff? Yes. And that's a good thing. Hopefully it's always the They actually look at the law and assess it in a way that is absence of bias. But we all know bias is inherent in the human condition. And that's where morality, and ethics come into play in terms of law. And also where reality overcomes the law in terms of how the law is executed and the law is implemented, and how people traffic through our society when dealing with the law. So, long story short, the law is very complex. The law sometimes do not align with morality and ethics. I mean, sometimes it does. But most important of all, the laws are reality as executed by someone else or implemented by someone else in terms of their worldview. And that's where you have a mismatch between law, morality, ethics, and reality. And the real thing about our society is reality trumps the law. My name is Dr. DAAM. This is Dr. DAAM Podcast, episode 37, Law and Morality, and then Reality. Please like and subscribe to my podcast. Have a great day. Be safe. Thank you.